Well, hello. I hope you are well today. I've got loads for you. Political and broadcasting legend Edwina Currie is on the show, covering a massive story. GPs have admitted that they're giving out far too many antidepressants. In fact, 1 in 5 adults is now on pills to make them happy. So is mental health a scam? Should we worry about big pharma? Do we need to grow a pair? You will love Edwina's answers on that one. Plus, Edwina's fears for the future of the Conservative Party and what she really thinks of not just Nigel Farage, but Donald Trump. You'll find her responses quite fascinating. So lots to get through. So great to have your company. As always, we start with my hot take. Now, amazingly, it was 15 years ago in 2010 that the then Prime Minister David Cameron, who is ultimately responsible for the Tories' crazy shift to the left, said that he would get immigration down to the tens of thousands. It was this same party in government that last year saw legal net migration of almost 1 million people in a year. Now, I'm no Carol Vorderman, but I would suggest that the mathematics of that are damning. In fact, even flaky Diane Abbott, who has a natural phobia of calculators, could see that those numbers are out of kilter. Well, breaking news today as the Office for National Statistics predict that our population is now forecast to increase by 5 million people within the next 7 years. That's 5 million people within the next 7 years and 10 million people by the year 2047. So that would be a city bigger than London in just the next 2 decades. Worth remembering that it's taken London 2,000 years to get to the size it currently is, and now the population explosion will see that achieved once again in just 20. Now, I've always been very clear that a sensible and controlled amount of immigration is good for the country. I am the proud son of Irish immigrants myself. The public and corporate sector would be lost without the amazing people who have come here to share their skills and expertise and improve our collective way of life. But the current scale is utterly terrifying and highly damaging. If we were talking about rocket scientists and brain surgeons and billionaires coming into the country, then happy days. But it's clear that that's not the case. It is low-paid workers, further impacting the British working class and driving down wages. And for those coming who don't work, well, they're added to Britain's already swollen benefits bill. This is what a race to the bottom looks like. So the ONS, the Office for National Statistics, are expecting over 250,000 people to enter the country every year for the foreseeable future. What does that mean for those sitting on an NHS waiting list or trying to get a GP appointment? What does that mean for people stuck in traffic or being unable to get a place on a train? What does that mean for those seeking a school place for their kids? Some are already dropping their children 2 or 3 boroughs away just to get them a good education. What do these crazy numbers mean for housing? Well, Labour's target of 1.5 million new homes in the next 5 years, which, by the way, they won't get close to, is a drop in the ocean. It won't even touch the sides or keep up with current demand. What do these numbers mean for law and order on our streets with an already overstretched police force? What do these numbers mean for integration with many people already living in ghettoized communities, parallel societies where the language is not spoken, where the culture is not embraced, and as we've seen with the grooming gangs and the so-called peace marches for Gaza, where the rule of law is not followed? Now, this is not to tar everyone with the same brush, to demonize groups, or to create a them and us society. Far from it. We are all British. Our islands have historically been a successful melting pot. Britain functions largely very well off the back of it. And the right amount of immigration is a good thing, particularly if people can contribute to the national cause. But in too many cases, that's not happening. In reality, mass immigration is nothing more than imported competition for resources, all in the name of propping up a broken economic and societal model. Because, of course, it's big business who love the cheap labour and cynical politicians who are using unchecked immigration to temporarily boost economic growth. but not the kind of growth that benefits individuals, the so-called per capita number. Oh no! Whilst the headline growth figure may increase, a clever sleight of hand which is like crack cocaine for our leaders, the per capita number demonstrates a lower standard of living for your average British citizen. Using mass immigration to boost economic growth is an egregious example of the government cooking the books and effectively lying to you. Uncontrolled legal and illegal immigration, I stress uncontrolled, is the theft of a nation from its own people. Now, I appreciate that folk come here from elsewhere and work in the NHS, the care sector, and other sectors too, and they do many jobs that British citizens will not. But that is another scandal, ignored by government after government. Why are 5 million working age adults not active in the economy? Why are they not working in the NHS, caring for the elderly and picking fruit? Why aren't they laying bricks on construction sites, emptying drains, building roads and working in call centres? There's actually a left-wing argument against mass migration, one that Labour should be making. If you're concerned about the plight of ordinary working people struggling with high taxes, a high cost of living and failing public services, which Labour and the Prime Minister say they are, then you would want to get these numbers down, given the impact they're having on our creaking infrastructure and the near bankrupt welfare state. Because once folk are here, it's free healthcare, free education, free housing and cash handouts if you're not working. And who the hell would bother to work if they didn't have to? How could you blame anyone for gaming the system? But it's now a system which is working against the country and its citizens. Not to mention the huge integration challenge of 250,000 people entering the country every year forever. At what point does the country stop being a nation altogether? A land bereft of identity, shared values and culture. When does Britain stop being Britain and simply become a bland, homogenised, globalist wet dream? You tell me. This is a national scandal. It's out of control and it doesn't make you a bad person for saying so. Britain is a successful, diverse society, the greatest melting pot in history. But this ingenious national project is in peril. What was once a high-trust society is losing faith in those that govern it. As Donald Trump in the US battles with governments like Colombia to return foreign criminals and with renewed efforts to police their border and prioritise American citizens, the contrast now between the UK and America couldn't be starker. Tackling these numbers is a huge opportunity for our Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, but I doubt that he has the political acumen, the stomach, or the ideological instinct to do anything about it. And of course, the Tories caused this crisis in the first place, which leaves the door open for an alternative figure, a disruptor, a maverick, a British Donald Trump, if you like, to deliver the will of the people. Well, I wonder who that would be. Now, before we carry on, to watch the whole show ad-free, head to the Mark Dolan Show on the Substack app or go to markdolan.com. Now, on today's show, we tackle a worrying trend gripping our nation, one likely to do more harm than good. According to a bombshell poll of 1,000 GPs, an astonishing 84% of doctors believe that we're medicalising the ups and downs of daily life, leading to a tidal wave of unnecessary prescriptions. Now, here's the kicker. This is what you need to know. Almost 1 in 5 adults in England is popping antidepressants. 1 in 5. That is millions of us turning to pills when in many cases, doctors privately think that we would be better off having lifestyle changes. 83% of GPs polled agree antidepressants are being handed out like sweets. The result? A public health system groaning under the weight of misunderstood diagnoses and wasted resources. Now, the Centre for Social Justice, the think tank behind this damning report, says that it's plain and simple. Misunderstood mental health is a leaky bucket draining this nation dry. Former Prime Minister Tony Blair, has even weighed in, warning against the rise of self-diagnosing mental health conditions. So is it time for a serious rethink? Who better to ask than one of the most respected and high-profile politicians of her generation? A woman who went on to become a best-selling author, TV personality and national radio broadcaster, Edwina Currie. Edwina, welcome to the show.
Hi, Mark. Hello, everyone.
Brilliant to see you. Now, Edwina, you're known to be a strong and tough person. Do we all need to grow a pair?
Yes, I think there's an element of yes. I mean, I never thought that I would agree with Tony Blair, but he's blown the whistle on something here, and he's right to do so. You didn't mention that I used to be a health minister, and in fact, before that, I chaired the big health authority in Birmingham, covering all sorts of activities, including a psychiatric hospital and a unit for learning disabilities and so on. So we had the full gamut there, which I got a lot of experience about in over a decade of service there. One of the problems, I think, is this over-medicalization of just about everything. There's an over-medicalization of sadness. I mean, sadness is normal. Grief is normal. When you lose somebody that you care about, very much indeed, as I did when my husband died during the COVID epidemic, not of COVID, but of cancer, even if you're well prepared for it, you know it's going to come, you will feel awful afterwards. That's the way our hormones behave. That's the way our brains behave. We want to colour in ourselves. Sometimes people feel tremendous anger about it. We understand a lot of that. But what's tending to happen is that far too often, and particularly amongst, shall we just say, people younger than you and me, Mark, there is a tendency to say, oh, I must be mentally ill and I must have medication for this. And of course, the medications have their own side effects and they create dependency, both physical and psychological. But the real thing that's not then happening is that people aren't being given any kind of way of coping, of the kind of mechanisms, the sensible things that actually people are saying to older people now, which is, you know, don't stay at home, don't get stuck in the house, go on out, go and enjoy the countryside, go and have a walk, get a dog, join the WI or something like that.
Let's not get carried away.
And all these are coping mechanisms that enable us to deal with the ups and downs of normal events in a normal life. And the worst thing you can often do is take a tablet for it.
Indeed, it's not even clear that the medication is working. There was a review recently into antidepressants over the last 4 decades, and the data isn't that compelling that it's really necessarily helping people. It might be in extreme cases, but not the millions of people who are popping pills like Smarties.
Well, if you take a medication for something you don't have, it ain't going to work, is it? And particularly if you take the medication instead of having, well, joining the WI, which might work, then you are going to have a continued problem, despite the fact that you are costing a fortune for the rest of us taking the medication. I mean, my mother got to nearly 93. I know anecdotes are you know, bad news, but she got to nearly 93 by absolutely refusing to take any tablets at all. And I'd say to her, well, what happens if you don't feel well, Mum? She said, well, I'll go to bed. I'll have a drink of hot whiskey and lemon and I'll go to bed and I feel better in the morning. And you think, oh, my God, why don't other people do that? I mean, maybe that will help the sales of Scotch whiskey. I don't know. I do hope so, Mark. I think that would be wonderful. But in the end, the old natural remedies will work where the medications don't. And in fact, if you wrongly medicate, as you have just pointed out, you foul up all the research results. You're not helping the people who need it. You're not focusing the medications in the particular cases where they can be life-changingly helpful. And that means that actually a hell of a lot of mental illness, we do not know what we're doing.
Most definitely. And you mentioned, of course, that you were a very high-profile health minister under Mrs. Thatcher. Were you concerned about the power, the footprint and the business model of the pharmaceutical industry at the time? Because, of course, it's grown exponentially since then. I know people that will tell me, they'll look me in the eye, Edwina, and they'll say, without antidepressant medication, I wouldn't be here. So fair play. I've got no doubt that the reviewers and listeners watching and listening to this show who need those drugs. But are you concerned about the industry that's profiting from so many of us popping pills?
No, I'm not really, not in general. And indeed, I'm a lifelong asthmatic. So the asthmatic medications have saved my life on numerous occasions, and I'm really grateful to them. And as most older women will tell you, maybe a few older men, who knows? Hormone replacement therapy is a joy, at least for those people that it suits. So Big Pharma is good news. And I think I've been vaccinated against COVID now something like 8 times, and that would not have happened without Big Pharma. It saves millions, billions indeed, of lives. There are some niche companies that I think their marketing techniques are really very dubious. They've often been called out. We found this with the opioids, for example. We found this as well with some niche medications. One of the problems I used to face as a health minister was there'd be 1 or 2 companies working on quite rare diseases with horrible debilitating effects. And then they would try and insist that the health service bought those medications. And they would have special interest groups composed of the people with these dreadful illnesses going on TV saying how horrible health ministers were because we said, actually, they don't work, or they don't work very effectively, or we'd rather wait till something better comes along. So you do get that a bit. When it comes to the antidepressants, my suspicion is that the pressure is coming from the patients, that they're the ones that are rolling along to busy doctors and saying, oh, I don't feel well. And perhaps from the internet, they've got the right kind of vocabulary for their symptoms.
Yeah.
They sometimes, I might get cancelled for this, but they sometimes say exactly the same thing when they're applying for disability benefits. They know what to say. They know how to express the illness and the condition. There's an element of mimicry there. And the GPs find it just easier to reach for the prescription pad. It's really important that we have alternatives to that, which includes sometimes being a bit tough on them and saying, no, actually, the worst thing for you is being at home. And the best thing for you is having a job and getting out to work, and getting back into the discipline and the satisfaction of being able to pay for your own food on the table.
Most definitely have a healthy diet, get enough sleep, don't take drugs, don't drink to excess, get fresh air, bit of sunlight, all of those things, Edwina, that you mentioned earlier. Lifestyle related illnesses are a big headache for the NHS. Now, does all of this start at school in terms of education? Do we need to explain to children that life is difficult?
Well, I think we need always to educate children in the realities of life and of thinking about, well, as you mentioned, good food and all the rest of it. I think we've revolutionised what they eat at school, for example, and more realisation that a good diet and a healthy lifestyle is going to benefit them a lot when they get older. Oh, right through life, indeed. When it comes to coping with tragedy, a lot of children's stories do this, I think, really, really well. In the 19th century, you used to have stories about little children having to climb up chimneys and then being turned into water babies or angels or goodness knows what. And there was a clear understanding that suffering was part of life. And we, a century on, we tend to have this attitude that there's a happiness pill somewhere. And if you go to your doctor and ask for one, your doctor may be impatient enough or pressed enough or disinterested enough to give you one. And it doesn't work. It really, really doesn't work. So yes, in school, yes, through programs like this, yes, through iconic leadership figures like yourself being sensible and saying, sometimes you will feel really, really down. It's normal. Do something about it. If you take medication, yeah, that might help, but shouldn't you try everything else first and see whether actually in a few days or a few weeks' time you feel better?
Now, you mentioned that Big Pharma is good. And of course, you think of all of the life-saving medications that have been made available over many decades, including antibiotics back in the day, vaccines, you name it. But are you concerned that the NHS is not in the pockets of big pharma, given the fact that when you go to see the doctor now, I mean, yes, sometimes patients are smart, they want to get their pills, but whenever I've been to the doctor, whatever the ailment, the first thing they do is look up which pill to give me. So is there a cultural issue within the NHS there that they're not more focused on lifestyle and they're too keen to prescribe medication?
It could well be that it's just so much easier to write a prescription.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the system, goes to the pharmacist, gets paid for, and Bob's your uncle.
And the
I
pharmaceutical industry love it because they're making money, Edwina. Is that not a concern?
Well, let me be totally honest here. I have shares in pharmaceutical companies and I'm proud to
Aha.
do so. Where I live up near Macclesfield, we have some of the finest pharmaceutical companies in the world. And I don't say I trust them any more than I would trust anybody else, but nonetheless, I would be very loath to paint them as a failure. I think they're one of the great successes of the modern world, and I would much rather be me now than in the 1950s when I was a baby and we couldn't get polio vaccination and we didn't have
Mm.
antibiotics and so on. Anyway, that's my rant for the day. What we don't have in the system is enough alternatives. We have
Mm.
tended to see the alternatives as being a bit wishy-washy. But I've watched a young person, I won't say who it was, a young person who went through a very bad patch in school, was anorexic and in some difficulties. And a wonderful child health project was involved for a number of years. And the reason I know about it is I was invited to be one of the rota taking this young person to go to the clinic. And it was enormously helpful. But it's expensive to set up. It's tricky to set up. Evaluation is hard. Recruiting staff,
Mm.
it involves a lot of good people to do it. The charities do it quite well, but just like pharma, they're doing it from a point of view. In other words, writing the script is in the system, and it has been since the NHS was set up. Providing an alternative to medication is not really in the system. It's scrappy, it's local, as a postcode lottery, and it may not be effective or very good. If it is
Mm.
good, Mark, it's wonderful and it doesn't receive nearly enough attention. The alternatives, the talking therapy, the cognitive behavioral therapy, the bits of psychology and psychiatry that really, really help, they are wonderful and we ought to have a lot more of them.
Completely agree. Now, mental health, Edwina, is notoriously difficult to prove. Is it likely, therefore, that many people are gaming the system and effectively defrauding the taxpayer?
Yes, of course it's likely. In fact, it's almost
Mm.
certainly happening. Um, we have, I think it was 5 or 6 million last time I looked, people who are on disability benefits who aren't
Yeah.
working. It beggars belief that we've got that many people who are so ill that they cannot be holding down even a part-time job.
Mm.
And many people with serious disabilities in wheelchairs are working. And a lot of it, I think, is to do with how much help and support employers are able to give and to recognise that they will have bad days occasionally when the pain is too much. But on the other hand, they can, with the right support, they can live long and happy and very, very productive lives. I think there's also, and this is my personal view, I think there's also a misunderstanding of diagnosis. Everybody in my family thinks I'm neurodivergent. I've never been tested. It's quite likely. I put things in straight lines and I can focus very hard. And I'm told that I'm sometimes not empathetic, as if that's a fault. And I'm a problem solver. And, my heroes include people like George Stephenson, who could hardly read and write, but he designed trains and all that kind of thing. In another world, that's me. And my reaction to any suggestion that you're neurodivergent, Mum, is so what?
Mm.
So what? And you see my point immediately, that we are, in a sense, all very different people. And I think sometimes sticking a label on somebody gives them an excuse, perhaps not to obey the norms that make society strong and healthy. And I think that's wrong. I think that's wrong. Whoever we are, whatever our circumstances, whatever our talents and our abilities, whatever our quirks and our impossibilities, we all have possibilities. And I believe, and it's one of the things that drove me into politics and made me a Tory, I believe we have a responsibility, every single one of us, to put back into society whatever we can. And that includes holding down a job. That includes paying your taxes. That includes bringing up your kids. That includes looking after your health, a whole host of personal responsibilities that help to improve the control you have over your life and over your future choices. And if we all do that, then society is a better place. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense because you mentioned the number of people that are on disability benefit. The other figure that's shocking is upwards of 5 million working age adults are not active in the economy. Now, they might be on long-term sick, it could be stress, or it could just be that they've chosen not to work. None of this is financially sustainable, is it? At a certain point, the whole welfare system is going to fall over.
Well, it is falling over. The welfare system is already under attack in ways that are causing grief to a lot of older people. The most unpopular thing this new government has done in Britain is to get rid of the winter fuel allowance, which was introduced by a Labour minister many, many years ago in order to help with the winter fuel bills. And it's not just the money, it's the sense of being under attack and of no longer being cared for by society as a whole. And you're absolutely right. What that means is the people of working age, and that includes us up to about, I suppose, 70 or 75, if you like, if they can work, they should be working. And they don't, because basic economic fact, if you can have more money on benefits and you can get into the benefit system than you could while you were working, why would you work? As long as you can continue like that, then you're likely to do so. There's one particular group that I think we ought to also think about. When I went to university, only 1 person in 10 went to uni, and hardly anybody, except the extremely clever, stayed on to do a master's or a PhD. Now we have something like 50% of 18-year-olds staying on, doing 3 or 4 year degrees, and then a high percentage of them staying on afterwards to do a master's degree. And from what I've seen of some of the people who contact me to be part of their research for a master's degree, they're rubbish. They really are rubbish. And they're amongst the people of working age who are not working. If we could only get some of the brightest in society into work at 17, 18, 19, get them trained up by employers, not necessarily through apprenticeships, which are very complicated, but through some sort of training role in their company, then I think we would do an enormous amount of good. And bear this in mind, for every 100,000 that you persuade not to do a master's degree and to start working, you're making a difference of 200,000 to the pattern of society. It's a no-brainer in my view.
I think it's a no-brainer. The higher education budget is enormous. I think some of that should be diverted towards school leavers for training, maybe apprenticeships, or even incentivizing companies to take young, talented people on and get them skilled up. I completely agree, Edwina. Listen, before we get to the future of the Tories, just a last point on mental health. Like everyone, you've had challenging times in your life. You mentioned very sadly losing your husband, John, in 2020. How do you get yourself through dark times?
I think the main way is to stay as physically fit as you possibly can. And I'm 78 now and it's getting harder. But that means that most people are younger than I am and therefore have more opportunity. Getting out and about in the countryside is lovely. That's why I choose to live in the Peak District. I can see trees from every window. I can see hills from most of the windows. And just getting out there and getting muddy and going up a hill or down a hill with the dogs is just lovely. You come back physically and mentally better. And it only takes an hour or two. It's wonderful. I'm told that being very sociable is a big help. I find that a mixed blessing. There are times when I'm sitting around and thinking, oh my God, they are so boring. And there are times when I'm with people who are so stimulating and it's exciting. You have to be a little selective, I think. Helping other people. You know, when you're looking at what other people have to put up with, you forget about yourself. You come back and you do that ancient Victorian values thing. You count your blessings. And that in itself is a source of some comfort. Making sure you've got enough money. So if you're short of money, get a job. Get a job. All sorts of little jobs will make such a difference. And if you've got family, then talking with them about some of the darker issues is always, always, always a good thing. Mind you, if you've got my kind of family, they can be incredibly matter of fact. I think it's because of this neurodivergent thing, so that their responses can be a bit startling. So, for example, when I said I was setting up, powers of attorney and all that kind of thing, my younger daughter said to me, "Right, Mum, what do you want us to do? If you collapse and you have a heart attack, do you want to be resuscitated or not?" I said, "What?" And
Crumbs.
she said, "We have to decide because you won't be able to tell us, and you need to tell us now." Now that
Sounds like your
causes great
youngest daughter.
amusement.
Yeah,
But you
she
can
sounds like a
imagine,
chip off the old
chip
block.
off the old block. That
Edwina.
was exactly the conversation that we had,
Yeah.
and it was a source of much amusement, and it was a help. Now, what I'm suggesting here is that if you have family, be family, be good to them, talk with them, share with them, and let them share with you. I think these are all little techniques that all help. If you fell out with your family a long time ago, try and repair. You do yourself some good if you can try and repair. If you can't, you've got neighbours, you've got friends, you've got other opportunities wherever you are, whatever your circumstances. There are opportunities way beyond just putting your head in your hands and feeling down and feeling sorry for yourself and for the world. There's always something you can do.
Brilliant advice. Edwina, you are one of the rock stars of the Conservative Party. Are you worried about its future?
Oh, a little bit, inevitably. Inevitably. Parties do change. Just because the Tories have been around for 200 years doesn't give us some kind of God-given right to survive. But I think in Kemi Badenoch, I think we've got a bit of a rock star ourselves there. I love the way she calls out the idiots. Absolutely love it. I voted for her twice, and I have found her refreshing, intelligent, original. She takes no prisoners. That's great. We have been suffering from far too long in this country from politicians that don't want to upset anybody, that don't want to cause offence, that don't want to cause any grief. We still got that a lot in the entertainment world. To say to anybody, "Oh, get over it," is seen as deeply offensive, when in fact it's often the best thing to say. But Kemi is a bit like that. And I love it, absolutely love it. In the longer run, this is how I think it might pan out. Reform is doing well because of one main issue, and that's immigration. The current Labour government has got to deal with immigration, or it knows it will lose the next election extremely badly. So that could mean that we come to the next general election in 4.5 years' time, and the immigration issue is under control. And that cuts the ground from under reform. But the kind of deep thinking that Kemi is doing, I think will be a very good foundation for the future and for a future government.
Has she got time, though? Is there time for deep thinking with reform winning so many column inches and essentially, conducting the national conversation whilst Kemi's sort of there in the distance looking on?
Do you remember somebody called Jeremy Corbyn?
Just a bit.
Yeah, well, he did exactly the same, didn't he? I mean, he got the membership of the Labour Party up to 600,000, and it was all about, Jeremy Corbyn, all of it, Glastonbury, the lot. And he lost the following 2 elections, one of them very badly, because in the end, we saw through him. Time is actually, I think, on the Tories' side. Reform and Farage are amazing, and they're raising issues in a very punchy way. What I don't particularly like about them is the populism that divides the world into us and them, and that says there are people that we hate and people that we fear. I don't see the world like that. I see the world as a collection of wildly disparate individuals, 6'5" skinny beanpole males and little old ladies like me having proper conversations. And that for me is absolutely the joy of a wonderful country like ours, whatever background, whatever history, whatever wealth, whatever political views or religions or whatever. It really doesn't matter to me. I like diversity. I find diversity exciting and stimulating. And they want to divide the world up into people like us, whatever that means, and people like them, which usually means a particular religion or a particular background. And I was born into a Jewish Orthodox family, and that makes me very scared. So I don't like that. In other words, Reform and me ain't ever going to mix, because I would get into such fights with them. But what Kemi is doing is recreating and re-establishing, I think, a thoughtful right and centre-right party of people who care about the country and also understand economics, which I don't think Reform does, and understand the strength and the resilience as opposed to the fragility of a very diverse world. I hope so anyway, and I think time's on our side.
I take your point about diversity. I'm the son of Irish immigrants myself, but would you sympathise with Reform UK supporters, possibly some listeners and viewers to this show, that are fine with immigration but just feel that the numbers are too high, that society is changing at a rapid rate, and that the illegal boat crossings are completely unacceptable?
Well, there's a whole host of things in there. I mean, it's fine for us. We're educated. Nobody's going to replace us in our jobs, in the sense that, we are the top of the tree. It is so much harder for somebody who doesn't have the skills, who perhaps doesn't have the education level, and finds themselves being replaced by cheaper immigrants. And that's happened a lot, particularly in the north of England. It's happened particularly in deindustrialized areas of the country as well, where the memory is very strong of macho blokes covered in coal dust or steel dust or whatever, and those industries have gone. And what has replaced them is people that don't look like them, don't talk like them, often don't have the same accents and so on. So I understand how troubled people can feel in those circumstances. But the answer is partly to reduce the numbers of legal immigration. The answer is partly to train up the people we've got to do the jobs that the immigrants are doing. And that particularly includes the care sector, where our 23-year-old master's degree graduates won't go into it, when in fact that's what's needed. And many of the people who are coming from countries like the Philippines to do it are themselves graduates and are quite remarkable people. So I think that's true. When it comes to the illegal crossings, that's a complex crime issue, and it needs the cooperation of a lot of countries to do it, because in many countries, enabling the passage of people from one border to another is not a crime in itself, and we really have to do that. I think Rishi Sunak made a huge rod for his own back in making that one of his pledges. What are we talking about? 2 years ago, that he would stop the boats. Stopping the boats is the last bit of a very long and complex criminal process, and we really need to make sure that we put the resources into that. That said, your parents, grandparents, my grandparents came here because this was a free country. They wanted to do well for their families, and they worked extremely hard to make that possible. And that, I think, is also to be recognised and to be welcomed.
I agree. And of course, as you've mentioned, stopping the boats is very, very complex indeed. It's going to require the support of the French. There's a sort of health and safety issue in the channel with regards to turning boats around, which is Reform's claimed policy. But what about those numbers for legal net migration? I mean, last year, almost 1 million people entering the country within a year. We've got a housing crisis. People struggle to get a GP appointment. School places are few and far between. Our roads are gridlocked. Do you see the problem?
I do, of course. And of course, at least part of the problem is that we allocate resources on the basis of census figures, and the census figures are wrong, and particularly in places like London, way, way under. Because if you're an illegal immigrant, the last thing you're going to do is tell the census people, are you? So I understand that. When I researched my own family's history back in 1912, my grandparents, with three little children, lived in three different addresses in Liverpool, as far as I can see. They were doing moonlight flits. So I understand entirely. What we have to do is stop supporting our universities by having student visas, because the students are paying a full whack. We probably need to close some universities. There are one or two, well, there's more than one or two. There's about 5 I think we wouldn't miss. They're not universities, they're just visa issuing establishments. And they are really a big, big mistake. Those resources should be going into something else. When it comes to the care sector, we have a big problem. We have far more old people than we have ever had before. We are able to support younger people with disabilities, and I mean real disabilities, far better than we ever did before. That's all wonderful. But it is labour intensive. And we really need to raise the status and the quality and the training of we need to raise the status of care so that people say, I work in the care sector with pride, and it's recognised as something really worthwhile. And that way, I think we might actually change some of that dynamic. But it ain't going to happen unless the government is very determined. I'll tell you the best thing that the Trump government, in my humble opinion, has done so far was they sacked the head of the US Coast Guard, who was a woman admiral, whose main claim to fame and whose main objective in life was diversity and equality and all that stuff. And actually, she wasn't being a proper Coast Guard. And they have changed that very, very quickly. And it may be that we need to look at Border Force and strengthen its approach to life, and to make sure that it's doing its job well, and that the people in it are backed when they have to take difficult decisions, that we're not sensitive, no, that we're not oversensitive and over anxious about not upsetting somebody. Sometimes you've got to upset people to do the right thing.
Lastly, speaking of upsetting people, Donald Trump, Edwina, is now a global flag bearer for conservatism. Do you back him?
Donald Trump, some years ago, was a supporter of the Democrat Party. And he famously said that if he ever tried to become president, he would do it for the Republicans because they were idiots and they would vote for him. Those of us with long memories can be a little bit cynical about all this. I think much of what he's doing in the States is overdue. I think between him and J.D. Vance, who of course hails from the Kentucky, Ohio area and comes from some of the poorest in society, his book, Hillbilly Elegy, should be compulsory reading in schools. It's excellent. And I read it before he became vice president. And Elon Musk, my car outside is a Tesla. That's an amazing triumvirate. I mean, like most triumvirates, it will end up with one of them being the top dog. And 5 years from now, I think it'll be Vance and not Trump.
That's interesting.
I think we are at the start of a very interesting period in American and Western history, in which real efforts are made to improve the lot of some of the lowest and poorest in society, the most disadvantaged. That's what socialists think they're going to do, but they don't. They sit in Islington and they pontificate, and then they pay for more and more universities, none of which makes a scrap of difference to the guy in Rotherham or Rochdale or Bolton. And we are seeing some changes in America that I, for one, will be following with tremendous interest and hope that they are successful.
My thanks to the formidable former government minister, broadcaster and best-selling author Edwina Currie. Thanks, Edwina. Thanks for watching. Now, to see the whole show, ad-free and uncensored, plus bonus material, head to my Substack at markdolan.com.